What if the history you learned in school was only half the truth? It is a question that feels uncomfortable, even dangerous, because history is supposed to be solid, fixed, reliable. From a young age, Americans are taught a powerful story, one that shapes identity, pride, and belief. It is a story of freedom, democracy, and moral leadership. A story where the United States rises from struggle to become a guiding light for the world. A nation built by brave leaders, defended by noble sacrifices, and guided by righteous decisions. This story is repeated everywhere, in classrooms, textbooks, speeches, movies, and national celebrations. Over time, it becomes familiar, comfortable, almost unquestionable. But history is never that simple. The real question is not what we were taught. The real question is what we were never taught. History is not just a record of the past. It is a powerful tool. It shapes how people think, how societies define good and evil, and how nations justify their actions. History decides who becomes a hero, who is remembered as a villain, and who disappears entirely. In America, history was carefully written to protect a national image, strong, righteous, and morally superior. In doing so, many uncomfortable chapters were reduced, softened, rewritten, or erased altogether. This does not mean the story of America is false. It means it is incomplete. In schools, students learn that America has always stood for liberty and human rights. They learn about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the fight against tyranny. These lessons are real and important, but what is often missing are the moments when those same values were quietly abandoned, moments when fear, power, or ambition outweighed principle. One of the most disturbing examples comes from the 1950s and 1960s, during the height of the Cold War. At the same time America was presenting itself as the global defender of freedom, the Central Intelligence Agency was running a secret program known as MK Ultra. This program was not science fiction. It was real. Under MK Ultra, American citizens were unknowingly used in mind control experiments. People were given powerful psychoactive drugs without consent. Psychological torture was disguised as research. Sensory deprivation, manipulation, and emotional breakdown were not accidents, they were objectives. The goal was simple and terrifying: to understand how the human mind could be broken, controlled, or rewritten. All of this was done in the name of national security. The Cold War created fear of enemies, fear of infiltration, fear of losing control. That fear became an excuse. Lines that were never supposed to be crossed were crossed quietly, in secret rooms, far from public scrutiny. Lives were permanently damaged. Families were destroyed. Some victims never fully recovered. And yet, this chapter barely appears in school textbooks. When history was written, these people were pushed into the shadows, because acknowledging them would raise dangerous questions about power, ethics, and accountability. Another chapter often softened or ignored is the story of Native Americans. America is frequently described as a new world discovered by explorers. But discovered by whom? This land was not empty. Long before European settlers arrived, millions of Native Americans lived across the continent. They had complex governments, rich cultures, distinct languages, and deep spiritual connections to the land. Their societies were not primitive, they were different. As the nation expanded westward, Native communities were displaced, broken, and often wiped out. Treaties were signed and broken, lands were taken, entire tribes were forced to march away from their homes. Children were removed from their families and sent to schools designed not to educate them, but to erase their identity. Their language was punished, their traditions were banned. Their history was rewritten to make conquest sound like destiny. In textbooks, this process is often called westward expansion. In reality, it was systematic removal. Words were carefully chosen to make violence sound necessary and suffering sound inevitable. By changing language, history changed meaning. What might have been remembered as injustice was reframed as progress. Then came the Cold War, usually taught as a moral battle between freedom and communism. Students learned that America acted to protect the world from a dangerous ideology. There is truth in that narrative, but behind the scenes, the Cold War was far more complex and far more destructive. The United States rarely fought openly. Instead, it influenced elections, supported coups, and intervened in foreign governments across Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East. These actions were strategic, calculated, and often hidden. Leaders believed they were preventing greater harm, but for the countries affected, the consequences were real and devastating. Governments were overthrown, civil wars erupted, entire regions were destabilized. These stories were rarely discussed in classrooms because they did not fit the narrative of moral clarity. They existed in gray areas, places where good intentions collided with terrible outcomes, and gray areas make history harder to teach. This was not an accident. History was shaped intentionally, because if people truly understood that governments, any government, are capable of serious wrongdoing, they would begin to ask questions, and questions are dangerous to power. So history was simplified. Good and evil were clearly labeled. Complexity was removed. Accountability faded into the background. For decades, this version of history went largely unchallenged. It was accepted, memorized, and passed down. But today, that is changing. We live in a digital age. Documents once locked away are being declassified. Archives are opening. Whistleblowers, historians, and journalists are revisiting old decisions with new evidence. Stories that were buried are resurfacing. People are no longer satisfied with comfortable narratives. In 2026, topics like hidden history, untold truth, and declassified secrets are trending across the United States. Younger generations are questioning what they were taught, not out of hatred for their country, but out of curiosity and responsibility. This documentary is not about attacking America. It is about understanding it. A nation's strength does not come from pretending it was perfect. It comes from confronting its past honestly. True patriotism is not blind loyalty. It is the courage to face uncomfortable truths and learn from them. History should not be a myth designed to make us feel comfortable. It should be a mirror. Sometimes that mirror is painful. Sometimes it reveals mistakes, fear, and failure. But only by looking into it can a society grow stronger, wiser, and more just. So here is the final question. If history only tells us what is easy to hear, is it really history at all? True freedom does not come from memorizing approved stories. It comes from curiosity, from doubt, from the courage to ask questions even when the answers are unsettling. Because history is not just about the past, it shapes how we see the present, and it determines the future we are building.